The first gunshot shattered the Tuesday morning calm at Riverside Elementary like a thunderclap in a clear sky. I was reorganizing the supply closet in my third-grade classroom when the sharp crack echoed through the hallways, followed immediately by screaming children and the heavy thud of running feet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 20 years. 20 years since I'd heard that sound in context, since my body had automatically dropped into a combat crouch without conscious thought. My hands moved to positions that didn't exist anymore, reaching for weapons that weren't there, accessing training that I'd buried so deep I sometimes forgot it existed, but muscle memory is a cruel teacher. It never truly forgets. Mrs. Rodriguez, what was that? Emma Chen's voice cut through my momentary paralysis. Sweet Emma with her gap-toothed smile and endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether her pet hamster would go to heaven. She stood in the doorway, her small face pale with confusion. I forced my expression into something resembling calm, though every nerve in my body was screaming tactical assessments I hadn't made in 2 decades. 3 exits from this room. Windows too high for children to reach safely. Classroom door, no proper lock, just the standard handle mechanism that wouldn't stop a determined intruder. It's probably just construction work, sweetheart, I lied. Smoothly, moving toward her with deliberate calm. Let's get you back to your desk. But even as I spoke, I was counting. 16 children in my classroom. 24 in Mrs. Patterson's room next door. 47 in the gymnasium for morning assembly. The architectural layout of every hallway, every exit, every potential bottleneck was suddenly crystal clear in my mind, as if someone had overlaid my suburban elementary school memories with the tactical precision of my former life. Another shot. Then another. This time, there was no mistaking it. This time, the lockdown alarm began its bone-chilling wail throughout the building. Everyone away from the windows, I called out, my voice carrying an authority that surprised even me. Quick and quiet, just like we practiced. The children moved with the peculiar obedience that comes from genuine fear, clustering in the corner furthest from the door and windows. I could see the questions in their eyes, but training, theirs and mine, took over. They huddled together, small bodies pressed close, while I moved to lock the door and kill the lights. Standard lockdown procedure. Hide, silence, wait for help. But as I crouched beside my students, listening to the distant sounds of chaos, every instinct I'd spent 20 years suppressing was screaming at me to move, to act, to do something other than wait helplessly in the dark. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and until this moment, I was just another elementary school teacher in the quiet suburb of Millbrook, Vermont. 39 years old, divorced, mother to a brilliant 13-year-old daughter named Sophia, who attends the middle school 2 miles down the road. I drove a sensible Honda Civic, lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, and spent my evenings grading papers and helping Sophia with her advanced mathematics homework. My colleagues knew me as the soft-spoken teacher who never raised her voice, who could calm the most difficult child with infinite patience, who brought homemade cookies to every staff meeting. Parents appreciated my gentle approach and my ability to see the potential in every student, no matter how challenging. What they didn't know, what no one in my civilian life knew, was that before I became Elena Rodriguez, 3rd-grade teacher, I had been Captain Elena Vasquez, United States Air Force pararescue. Before I spent my days teaching children to read and write, I had spent 6 years jumping out of aircraft into hostile territory to save lives that everyone else had written off as lost, that others may live. The pararescue motto was etched into my soul deeper than any tattoo, carved into my identity in ways that 20 years of civilian life couldn't erase. We were the guardian angels of the battlefield, the ones who went where others couldn't go, who brought people home when all hope was lost. I had been one of only 14 women to complete the brutal 2-year pararescue training pipeline. Out of the 317 candidates who started with me, only 49 graduated. Most of those who failed were washed out during the first phase, the swimming, the running, the endless physical challenges designed to separate the determined from the desperate. But it wasn't the physical training that nearly broke me. It was the psychological preparation, the simulation exercises where we had to make impossible choices about who to save when resources were limited, who had the best chance of survival when there wasn't time to help everyone. I learned to compartmentalize. Fear, to function with precision under conditions that would paralyze most people. I learned to assess, adapt, and act when seconds meant the difference between life and death, and now, crouched in a darkened classroom while an active shooter stalked the hallways of my daughter's school district, all of that training was roaring back to life like a sleeping dragon suddenly awakened. The police would later determine that Marcus Chen, no relation to my student Emma, had entered Riverside Elementary through the main office at exactly 9:47 a.m. He was 26 years old, unemployed for the past 8 months, living in his mother's basement in a neighborhood just 3 miles from the school. The investigation would reveal a manifesto filled with rambling grievances against society, against women, against the educational system that he blamed for his failures, but in that moment, crouched in the dark with 16 terrified children depending on me, I didn't know his name or his motivations. I only knew the sound of his footsteps in the hallway outside, the methodical way he was checking doors, the pattern of his movement that suggested military training or extensive preparation. "Mrs. Rodriguez," whispered Jamie Harrison, the class clown who never sat still during reading time. "I'm scared." "I know, baby," I whispered back, my hand finding his shoulder in the darkness. "But you're being so brave. All of you are." Through the small window in our classroom door, I could see the hallway dimly lit by emergency lighting. A shadow passed by, tall, deliberate, carrying what looked like a tactical rifle. My mind automatically catalogued details, approximate height and weight, gait patterns that suggested he was moving with purpose rather than randomly. He was 3 doors down from us, working his way methodically through the wing. Mrs. Patterson's room was next door. I could hear her voice through the thin walls, trying to keep her own students calm. The tactical part of my brain was already running calculations. Distance to the exits. Time it would take to evacuate children through the windows. Probability of successfully defending this position versus moving to a more secure location, but the teacher part of my brain was focused on the 16 small bodies pressed against me in the darkness, on the trust in their eyes even in the midst of terror. These weren't soldiers under my command. They were children, my children, in every way that mattered. The footsteps stopped outside Mrs. Patterson's room. I heard the door handle rattle. Heard Patricia's voice, higher pitched now, telling her students to stay quiet. Then I heard the sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come, the splintering of wood as the door was forced open. The screaming started immediately. 20 years ago, I would have been through that wall in seconds. 20 years ago, I would have had equipment, backup, a mission plan. 20 years ago, I was part of a team that could extract hostages from situations exactly like this one. But 20 years ago, I didn't have 16 third graders depending on me to make the right choice. The gunfire from the next room was sporadic, which told me he wasn't simply executing everyone in sight. He was selective, methodical. The psychological profile was becoming clearer. This wasn't random violence but targeted rage with specific triggers. I made a decision that went against every protective instinct I had. I was going to leave my students. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered to Emma, the most mature of my students. "I need you to count to 100 very slowly. If I'm not back by then, you take everyone to the supply closet and lock the door from the inside. Don't come out until you hear Mrs. Patterson or another teacher calling your names. Do you understand?" Emma's eyes were wide, but she nodded. "Where are you going?" "To get help," I lied, because the truth was something I couldn't explain to an 8-year-old child. The truth was that Elena Rodriguez, the teacher, was about to step aside and let Captain Elena Vasquez take control. The truth was that for the first time in 20 years, I was going to do what I had been trained to do, go where others couldn't go, save lives that everyone else had written off as lost. I kissed the top of Emma's head and moved toward the door. The hallway was a study in controlled chaos. Emergency lighting cast everything in stark shadows. I could hear police sirens in the distance, but they were still minutes away. Minutes that the children in Mrs. Patterson's room didn't have. I slipped out of my classroom and into the hallway, moving with a silence that surprised me. My body remembered things my mind had forgotten: how to step without creating sound, how to use shadows for concealment, how to approach a hostile position without detection. Through the small window in Mrs. Patterson's door, I could see the gunman's silhouette. He was facing away from the door, addressing the huddled children and their teacher with what sounded like a prepared speech about society's failures and his need for revenge. Patricia was standing between him and her students, her arms spread wide in a gesture of protection that was both heartbreaking and futile. She was trying to engage him in conversation, to humanize herself and her children, to find some connection that might save their lives. It was exactly what the crisis management training had taught us to do. And it was exactly what would get them all killed if he decided he was done talking. I tested the door handle. Unlocked. He hadn't secured his position, which meant either he was very confident in his abilities or he wasn't as prepared as his initial approach had suggested. Through the gap beneath the door, I could see his feet. He was positioned about 12 feet into the classroom, with clear lines of sight to both the students and the teacher. A tactical assault through the door would expose me to his fire for critical seconds, but there was another option. The supply closet in Mrs. Patterson's room shared a wall with the supply closet in my room. During my 3 years teaching here, I had noticed that the wall between them was just drywall, probably added when they converted one large room into 2 smaller classrooms. I moved back to my classroom, where Emma was counting softly under her breath. 37, 38, 39, change of plans, I whispered. Everyone into the supply closet. Now. As my students filed quietly into the closet, I grabbed the hammer from my emergency toolkit and followed them in, closing the door behind us. Mrs. Rodriguez? Emma's voice was barely audible. I need you all to cover your ears and close your eyes, I whispered. This is going to be loud. And then, for the first time in 20 years, Captain Elena Vasquez went to work. The drywall gave way after 3 precise strikes. The sound was masked by the gunman's continued monologue in the next room, his voice rising as he worked himself into greater agitation. Through the hole I'd created, I could see into Mrs. Patterson's supply closet, and beyond that, a sliver of the classroom where 24 children sat terrified in the corner. I squeezed through the opening, my body moving with muscle memory that felt both foreign and familiar. The supply closet door was slightly ajar, giving me a clear view of the gunman's position. He was younger than I had expected, with the soft build of someone who spent more time online than in physical activity. The rifle he carried was an AR-15. Variant, civilian legal but modified with accessories that suggested someone who had done extensive research. His stance was awkward, though. He held the weapon like someone who had learned from YouTube videos rather than proper instruction. Most importantly, he had made the classic amateur mistake. He had become so focused on his intended victims that he had lost awareness of his surroundings. I counted to 3. Said a prayer to whatever gods protect fools and children, and moved. The first rule of close quarters combat is speed and violence of action. The second rule is to never give your opponent time to think, only time to react. I hit him low and hard, driving my shoulder into the back of his knees while simultaneously grabbing for the rifle. He went down with a surprised grunt, the weapon clattering across the floor as we both fell. He was larger than me, but I had 20 years of combat experience and the kind of focused aggression that comes from protecting something more important than your own life. He tried to roll over, to bring his weight to bear, but I had already secured a chokehold that would cut off blood flow to his brain in seconds. His hands clawed at my arms, his body bucking and twisting, but the physics were simple. Applied correctly, the hold was inescapable. Sleep, I whispered, just like my instructor had taught me all those years ago. Just go to sleep. He went limp in my arms. The silence that followed was profound. 24 children stared at me from their corner, their expressions a mixture of confusion, fear, and something that might have been awe. Mrs. Patterson sat slumped against the wall, tears streaming down her face. Patricia, I called softly. Are you hurt? She shook her head, then seemed to find her voice. Elena? How did you? Where did you? I could hear sirens getting closer, voices in the hallway as other teachers began to emerge from their locked classrooms. Soon, this room would be full of police officers and paramedics and investigators, all asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. I looked down at the unconscious gunman, then at the rifle I had kicked across the room, then at the children who were starting to understand that the danger was over. I used to be in the military, I said simply, which was true enough, but as I helped Patricia get her students organized and ready for evacuation, as I answered the first wave of questions from responding officers, as I watched my own students emerge safely from the supply closet, I knew that this moment had changed everything. For 20 years, I had been Elena Rodriguez, the quiet teacher who never raised her voice. But in the space of 5 minutes, Captain Elena Vasquez had reasserted herself, and I wasn't sure I could put that genie back in the bottle. the real question wasn't how I had saved those children, the real question was what would happen when my own daughter found out who her mother really was. The Millbrook Police Department's interview room smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. I sat across from Detective Sarah Morrison, a woman about my age with prematurely gray hair, and the kind of direct gaze that came from years of separating truth from fiction. Between us lay a manila folder that I suspected contained more questions than answers. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Detective Morrison began, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. "I need to understand exactly what happened in that classroom. Your account differs significantly from standard civilian response protocols. 3 hours had passed since I'd rendered Marcus Chin unconscious. 3 hours since I'd watched paramedics wheel him away on a stretcher, his wrists secured with zip ties as a precaution. 3 hours since I'd hugged my students one by one as they were reunited with their frantic parents, their small arms clinging to me like I was some kind of superhero instead of a woman whose carefully constructed life had just imploded. I did what I had to do to protect the children," I said, which was true but incomplete. Detective Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen how trained professionals respond to active shooter situations, and I've seen how civilians respond. What you did today..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That wasn't civilian behavior. That was tactical intervention performed by someone with extensive combat training." Through the small window in the interview room, I could see the parking lot where news vans were already gathering. Channel 8 News, Channel 3, CNN affiliate vehicles with satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metallic flowers. The story was already breaking: local teacher stops school shooter. By evening, it would be national news. I thought about Sophia, probably watching from her middle school as emergency vehicles surrounded her mother's workplace. I thought about the questions she would ask, the lies I would have to tell, or the truths I would finally have to reveal. "I served in the military," I repeated, the same half-truth I'd been giving everyone. "Which branch?" Detective Morrison's pen was ready. "Air Force." "MOS?" "Military Occupational Specialty." The question civilian investigators shouldn't know to ask unless they had military experience themselves. I looked at Detective Morrison more carefully, noticing details I'd missed before: the precise posture, the way she held her pen like it was a tool rather than an accessory, the small scar on her left hand that looked suspiciously like shrapnel damage. "You served," I said. It wasn't a question. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Army Military Police, 3 tours in Afghanistan." Which is why I know the difference between someone who spent 4 years in supply logistics and someone who was trained for direct action. "So I'll ask again, what was your MOS?" The moment stretched between us, heavy with the weight of recognition. She knew. Maybe not the specifics, but she knew I was far more than a teacher who had happened to serve in the military. 1T2X1, I said finally. "Pararescue." Detective Morrison's pen stopped moving. She looked up at me with new understanding, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to something approaching respect. "Jesus Christ," she breathed. "PJ. No wonder you moved like that." Pararescue. The Air Force's Special Operations Rescue Specialists. The ones who went behind enemy lines to bring people home. The ones who jumped out of perfectly good aircraft into the worst possible situations because someone's life depended on it. "How long?" she asked. 6 years active duty. Deployed 4 times. "And you've been teaching elementary school for 3 years here." "Taught in Massachusetts before that. Total of 8 years in education." Detective Morrison set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Rodriguez, do you understand what's about to happen to your life?" I did. I understood perfectly. The carefully constructed identity of Elena Rodriguez, quiet teacher, was about to be scrutinized by every news outlet in the country. Reporters would dig into my background, would discover the gaps in my history, would start asking questions about why a decorated special operations veteran was teaching 3rd grade in a small Vermont town. They would find out about Captain Elena Vasquez, they would find out about Afghanistan, they would find out about the mission that ended my military career and sent me into self-imposed exile. "I need to call my daughter," I said. Sophia picked up on the second ring. "Mom? Are you okay?" They put the middle school on lockdown and said there was something happening at Riverside. "Mrs. Chen is crying in the hallway." Emma Chen's mother. Of course. The ripple effects were already beginning. I'm fine, baby. Everyone is fine. But I need you to listen to me very carefully. I was using the detective's phone, standing in the hallway outside the interview room. Through the windows, I could see more news vans arriving, reporters setting up their equipment, preparing for the circus that my life was about to become. The news is going to say some things about me. About what I did today and about what I used to do before you were born. I need you to remember that no matter what you hear, no matter what people say, I'm still your mom. I love you more than anything in this world, and everything I've ever done has been to protect you and give you a good life. Mom, you're scaring me. What kind of things are they going to say? I closed my eyes. Sophia was 13, brilliant, perceptive. She deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as I could give her. They're going to say that I was in the military. That I did things, saw things, that were dangerous and violent. They might make me sound like someone you don't recognize. Were you? In the military? Yes. Were you like a soldier? Something like that. There was a long pause. I could hear the noise of the middle school behind her, the controlled chaos of an institution managing its own crisis response. Is that why you never talk about what you did before I was born? Is that why we moved to Vermont when I was little? My brilliant daughter. Too smart for her own good, too perceptive to fool with comfortable lies. Partly, yes. Mom, did you hurt people? The question I'd been dreading for 13 years. The question I'd hoped she would never think to ask. Sometimes I had to. To protect other people. To save lives. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, younger. Are you in trouble? No, baby. I'm not in trouble. I stopped a bad person from hurting children. But the way I stopped him is going to make people ask questions about me, about us. Things might get complicated for a while. How complicated? I looked out at the growing media presence, at Detective Morrison approaching with a fresh cup of coffee and a concerned expression. We'll figure it out together, I said. I'm going to finish talking to the police, and then I'm coming to get you. We'll go home and we'll talk about everything. I promise. Okay, Mom. I love you. I love you too, baby. More than you'll ever know. The interview continued for another hour. Detective Morrison was thorough but fair, her military background helping her understand both what I had done and why I had done it. She didn't press for details about my specific deployments or the circumstances that had led me to civilian life, for which I was grateful. You saved a lot of lives today, she said as we concluded. Mrs. Patterson's entire class, probably other children too if he had continued through the building. The response time for SWAT was still 8 minutes out when you neutralized the threat. I just did what needed to be done. That's exactly what I'd expect a PJ to say. She stood up, extending her hand. Thank you. From one veteran to another, thank you. Outside the police station, the media presence had grown exponentially. I counted at least 12 news crews, reporters from local and national outlets, camera operators testing their equipment. I could see microphones being adjusted, teleprompters being positioned, the infrastructure of a story that would soon consume my life. Principal Margaret Walsh was waiting for me by the school district's administrative vehicle, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. Elena, she said, rushing over as I emerged from the building. Thank God you're all right. The children are asking for you. The parents. She paused, struggling for words. They want to thank you. They want to understand how you knew what to do. I could see some of them gathered near the school entrance. Parents who had been reunited with their children, teachers who had emerged from their own lockdown protocols. Among them, I recognized Patricia Patterson, still pale but standing strong, surrounded by parents from her classroom. How much do they know? I asked. Just that you stopped the gunman. That you saved Patricia's class. Margaret lowered her voice. Elena, Channel 8 is asking about your background. They want to interview you, want to know about your military service. I told them I didn't know anything beyond your teaching credentials, but they're going to dig. Yes. And honestly, I think they have a right to know who you really are. We all do. Not because we don't trust you, she added quickly, but because if you have this kind of training, this kind of capability, maybe we should have known. Maybe we could have used it to better protect our children. She was right, of course. My secrecy hadn't just been about protecting my own privacy, it had potentially compromised the safety of the people I cared about. If the administration had known about my background, would they have included me in emergency planning? Would I have been better positioned to respond to a crisis like this? I need to collect Sophia, I said. Then I'll come back and we can talk about everything. Margaret nodded. The media is going to want a statement. The district is going to want answers. But Elena? She placed a hand on my shoulder. Whatever happened in your past, whatever brought you here, I'm grateful. We all are. Sophia was waiting for me in the middle school's main office, her backpack clutched in her lap, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she was processing complex emotions. She looked up as I entered, and I saw my daughter's face overlaid with new questions, new awareness of the person I had been before I became her mother. Ready to go home? I asked. She nodded, standing up with the careful precision that reminded me of myself at her age. Mrs. Henderson said there are news people outside. She said they might want to talk to me. They might. You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to. What if I want to? The question surprised me. I had expected fear, confusion, maybe resentment that I had kept such a significant part of my life secret. I hadn't expected curiosity. Then we'll figure out what you're comfortable saying. We walked out of the school together, my arm around her shoulders, both of us bracing for the attention that was waiting outside. The reporters noticed us immediately, cameras swinging in our direction, voices calling out questions. Mrs. Rodriguez, can you tell us about your military background? How did you know what to do in that situation? Are you a hero, Mrs. Rodriguez? I kept walking, guiding Sophia toward our car, but she surprised me by stopping and turning toward the cameras. My mom is a teacher, she said, her young voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. She teaches kids to read and helps them when they're scared and makes sure they feel safe every day. That's what she did today too. She kept kids safe because that's what she does. The reporters pressed closer, sensing a story within the story. What do you think about finding out your mother has this military background? Sophia looked up at me, then back at the cameras. I think she's always been exactly who she needed to be. That evening, we sat in our small living room with the television turned off and my laptop closed, trying to exist in a bubble of normalcy that we both knew was temporary. Sophia had asked for the whole story, and I had given her as much of it as I could. I told her about joining the Air Force at 18, about the grueling training to become a pararescue specialist, about the missions to save downed pilots and extract wounded soldiers from impossible situations. I told her about Afghanistan, about jumping into hostile territory to bring people home, about the brotherhood and sisterhood of people who chose to run toward danger instead of away from it. I told her about meeting her father during my second deployment, about the brief, intense relationship that gave me the greatest gift of my life but couldn't survive the realities of military service and his own struggles with combat trauma. I told her about the mission that changed everything, though I kept the details vague. An extraction gone wrong. A choice between saving one person or many. A decision that haunted me still and ultimately led me to leave the military and seek a quieter life. What I didn't tell her was how that decision had been the right one tactically but wrong in every other way that mattered. How the person I chose not to save had been someone's child, someone's everything. How their death had been officially classified as an acceptable loss but had felt like a moral failure that no amount of commendations could erase. Is that why you became a teacher? Sophia asked when I finished. To help kids instead of soldiers? Partly. I wanted to build something instead of just saving things that were already broken. Do you miss it? The military? I considered the question, thinking about the adrenaline and purpose and absolute clarity of mission that had defined my early adulthood. I miss parts of it. I miss the certainty of knowing exactly what needed to be done and having the training to do it. I miss working with people who would trust me with their lives and who I could trust with mine. Like today. Like today. Sophia curled up against me on the couch, the same way she had when she was small and needed comfort after a nightmare. Mom? Are people going to be weird now? At school, I mean. Are they going to treat you different? It was a perceptive question from someone who had grown up as the daughter of a single mother, who understood how quickly social dynamics could shift when people learned something unexpected about your family. Probably. Some people might think I'm more interesting than I actually am. Some people might be scared of me. Some people might want to use what happened today for their own purposes. What kind of purposes? I thought about the phone calls that had already started coming in. A literary agent who wanted to represent me for a book deal. A movie producer who thought my story would make a great film. A veterans organization that wanted me to speak at their fundraiser. A security company that offered me a consulting position. People who want to make money off my story. People who want to use what I did today to make a point about something else. Politicians, probably. That's gross. Yeah, it kind of is. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset through our small apartment windows. I knew that tomorrow would bring more questions, more attention, more decisions about how much of Elena Vasquez I was willing to let back into the life of Elena Rodriguez. Mom? Yeah, baby? I'm proud of you. For saving those kids today, but also for everything else. For serving our country and for taking care of me and for being brave enough to change your whole life when you needed to. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the weight of her trust and love. Thank you. That means everything to me. Are you going to keep teaching? It was the question I'd been avoiding all day. Margaret had made it clear that I would have a job as long as I wanted one, but she'd also made it clear that everything would be different now. Parents would have expectations. The media would continue to follow the story. Other schools, other organizations, would try to recruit me. I could go back to being Elena Rodriguez, third grade teacher, but I could never again be just Elena Rodriguez, third grade teacher. I don't know, I admitted. I love teaching. I love working with kids. But things are going to be complicated for a while. What if they are? Complicated, I mean. We can handle complicated. I looked at my daughter, brilliant, resilient, wise beyond her years, and realized that she was right. We could handle complicated. We'd been handling complicated her entire life. Yeah, I said. We can handle complicated. Epilogue, 6 months. Later, the Millbrook Community Center was packed for the graduation ceremony of our first women's self-defense class. 43 women had completed the 8-week program, ranging in age from 16 to 72, representing every demographic our small town had to offer. I watched from the side of the room as Detective Morrison, now Detective Morrison retired, and my business partner, demonstrated the final technique to the class. The workshop we'd developed combined traditional self-defense with situational awareness and crisis response, tailored specifically for civilian applications. Sophia sat in the front row, wearing her own graduation certificate on a lanyard around her neck. She'd been our youngest participant, and arguably our most dedicated student. The program had become as much hers as mine, a shared project that had brought us even closer together. The media attention had gradually faded, replaced by a different kind of recognition. We'd received inquiries from schools, community centers, and women's organizations across New England. The Vasquez-Morrison Defense Institute was booked solid for the next 18 months. Margaret Walsh approached me as the ceremony concluded. A familiar smile on her face. Still happy with your decision? She asked. I looked around the room at women who were walking differently now, standing straighter, carrying themselves with new confidence. I thought about the teachers we'd trained in crisis response, the parents who had learned how to better protect their families, the teenage girls who would never see themselves as helpless victims. Yeah, I said. I'm happy. Teaching had evolved. But it was still teaching. Protecting had evolved, but it was still protecting. I was still Elena Rodriguez, just a more complete version of herself. Sophia appeared at my elbow, glowing with pride and excitement. Mom, Mrs. Chen wants to sign up for the advanced course. And guess what? Emma wants to start the youth program. When she turns 13. Emma Chen, the sweet girl who had been counting to 100 in my supply closet 6 months ago, now saw herself as someone who could learn to be strong, to be prepared, to protect herself and others. That's wonderful, baby. Are you ready to go home? I looked around the community center one more time, at the women gathering their certificates and hugging their instructors, at the display boards showing photos from our various workshops and training sessions, at the life I had built from the ashes of my hidden past. Yeah, I said, taking Sophia's hand. I'm ready to go home. Outside, the Vermont evening was crisp and clear, full of possibility. We walked to our car together, mother and daughter, teacher and student, survivor and protector, hidden wings, hit. Turned out, were only hidden until they were needed, and when they were needed, they remembered exactly how to fly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.